She wanted him, not love, not loyalty, just control. He said no. So she waited. Waited until the lights were bright, the guests were watching, and the cameras were rolling. Then she accused him of something unspeakable. Then she slapped him. And while the crowd gasped and he walked away in silence, he wasn't done. Because what he did on that balcony didn't just expose her. It exposed everything. The Whitmore mansion wasn't just a home. It was a statement. A sprawling estate tucked into the heart of Manhattan, where marble floors whispered wealth and every chandelier sparkled like a secret. Camille Brooks moved through the crowd like she belonged, even though she wore the black uniform of staff. She was the head maid, young, graceful, and respected by everyone who mattered. But tonight, she wasn't alone. Her husband, Elijah Brooks, had come at her request. He wasn't used to these kinds of events. His modest suit, clean but worn, stood out among the designer tuxedos and diamond-studded gowns. He didn't mind. He was here for Camille, and Camille alone. Madison Whitmore, the billionaire's wife, spotted him the moment he stepped into the foyer. Her eyes narrowed, not with curiosity, but with something colder, something sharper. She had history with Elijah, not the kind that gets written down, the kind that lives in silence. Months ago, she had made a move. A quiet, private moment when she leaned too close, said too much, and touched his hand like it belonged to her. Elijah had pulled away, respectfully, firmly, and Madison hadn't forgotten. Now, she watched him from across the room, her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her husband, Blake Whitmore, was busy entertaining donors, oblivious to the tension building beneath the surface. Camille leaned in to whisper something to Elijah, her hand brushing his arm. Madison saw it, and something inside her shifted. This wasn't just a party. It was a setup, and Elijah had just walked into the lion's den. Elijah stood near the grand piano, sipping sparkling water from a crystal glass. He didn't drink, not at events like this. Not when eyes followed him like he didn't belong. Madison Whitmore approached slowly, her red gown trailing behind her like a warning. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that came with power and a plan. "Elijah," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You're not like the others." He nodded politely. "I'm just here for Camille." Madison tilted her head. "Camille's busy. Always working. Doesn't she ever let you breathe?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "She's dedicated. That's not a flaw." Madison stepped closer. Too close. Her perfume was expensive, intoxicating. Her hand brushed his arm. Lightly, deliberately. "You know," she whispered, "I could give you more than she ever could." Elijah stepped back. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think you've misunderstood me." Her smile vanished. "No, Elijah. I think you've misunderstood me." He looked around. No one was watching. The music was loud. The guests were laughing. But something about the moment felt dangerous. "I'm not interested," he said firmly. Madison's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret that." He turned and walked away, heart pounding, hands clenched. Camille found him near the terrace minutes later. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "Let's just get through tonight." But Madison wasn't done. She didn't like being told no. And she wasn't going to let Elijah walk away without paying the price. Madison Whitmore didn't need to raise her voice to make things happen. She had mastered the art of quiet control, the kind that moved people like chess pieces without them realizing they were being played. After Elijah walked away from her proposition, she didn't chase him. She didn't argue. She simply smiled and turned toward the crowd. She had a better idea. Camille returned to the ballroom, her eyes scanning for Elijah. She found him near the terrace, talking to a waiter. He looked calm, but she knew him too well. His shoulders were tight. His jaw was locked. "Elijah," she said softly, "did something happen?" He shook his head. "Nothing I can't handle." But Madison was already moving. She whispered to the event coordinator. She adjusted the lighting. She made sure the cameras were positioned just right. And then she made her way to Blake Whitmore, her husband, who was laughing with a senator near the bar. "Darling," she said sweetly, "I think we should recognize the staff tonight. Especially Camille and her husband. They've been so loyal." Blake smiled. "Of course. That's a lovely idea." Madison turned toward the stage, her heels clicking like a countdown. Camille felt it before it happened. A shift in the room. A tightening in the air. "Elijah," she whispered, "stay close." But Madison was already at the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth and commanding. "Tonight, we celebrate generosity, loyalty, and integrity. And I'd like to honor two people who've served this house with quiet devotion. She paused. Camille Brooks. And her husband, Elijah. The spotlight turned. The crowd applauded. And Elijah stepped forward, unaware that Madison's smile wasn't celebration. It was the beginning of a trap. The applause faded. Elijah stepped forward, unsure, his eyes scanning the crowd for Camille. She smiled at him from the edge of the ballroom, proud and radiant. Madison stood beside him, microphone in hand, her red gown shimmering under the lights. Elijah, she said sweetly, you've been such a presence in this house. Quiet, strong, loyal. He nodded, unsure where this was going. Madison turned to the crowd. But loyalty, she continued, isn't always what it seems. The room fell silent. Elijah, she said, her voice tightening, I trusted you. I welcomed you. And you violated that trust. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elijah's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Madison stepped closer, her voice rising. You tried to touch me. You cornered me in the study. You made me feel unsafe. Camille's hand flew to her mouth. Blake Whitmore turned sharply, eyes wide. That's not true, Elijah said, his voice steady but stunned. Madison's eyes flared. Don't lie to me. And then, she slapped him. Hard. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Elijah didn't react. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at her, eyes full of disbelief, pain, and something else. Resolve. He turned and walked out of the ballroom, past the stunned guests, past Camille's trembling hands, past Blake's frozen stare. He didn't say a word. But he wasn't leaving. Not yet. Because what Madison didn't know was that Elijah had proof. And what he was about to do, on that balcony, would change everything. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but inside the ballroom, the echo of the slap still rang louder than the music. Elijah stood on the balcony, the city lights stretching out before him like a silent audience. He didn't cry. He didn't pace. He simply stood there, still, composed, and waiting. Camille tried to follow, but Madison intercepted her with a smile. Let him cool off, she said sweetly. He's probably embarrassed. Camille's eyes narrowed. He didn't do anything wrong. Madison's smile didn't fade. Didn't he? Inside, the guests whispered. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. Blake Whitmore stood frozen, unsure whether to defend his wife or question her. But Elijah wasn't gone. He was watching. From the balcony, he saw the guests laughing again. He saw Madison basking in the attention. And he saw Camille, standing alone, confused, hurt, and surrounded by people who didn't know the truth. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small device. A flash drive. On it was everything. The security footage. The audio. The moment Madison had leaned in, touched his chest, and whispered things no married woman should say. He had kept it. Not out of spite, but out of caution. And now it was time. He walked back inside, unnoticed. He handed the drive to the event coordinator. Play this, he said quietly. Now. The coordinator hesitated. Elijah's eyes didn't blink. Now. And as the screen lit up and the footage began to play, the room fell silent. Because what Madison had tried to hide was about to be seen by everyone. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered to life. Guests turned, curious. Madison's smile faltered. Camille clutched her hands together, her eyes locked on Elijah. Then, the footage began. It wasn't grainy. It wasn't vague. It was crystal clear. Madison Whitmore, in her red gown, stepping into the study. Elijah, standing near the bookshelf. Her voice, unmistakable. You know, she said on the recording, I could give you more than she ever could. The crowd gasped. On screen, Madison placed her hand on Elijah's chest. He stepped back. Mrs. Whitmore, I think you've misunderstood me. Her voice sharpened. No, Elijah, I think you've misunderstood me. The footage paused, then replayed, then zoomed in. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs into outrage. Blake Whitmore stood frozen, his face pale. Madison's eyes darted wildly. This is fake, she said, voice trembling. It's been edited. But the event coordinator stepped forward. This came directly from your estate's security system. Timestamped. Unaltered. Camille's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of vindication. Elijah didn't speak. He didn't gloat. He simply stood beside his wife, his hand in hers. Madison turned to Blake. You believe me, don't you? Blake didn't answer. The crowd began to shift. Some walked away. Others stared. The illusion was shattered. Madison had tried to destroy a man's life with a lie, and Elijah had exposed her, not with rage, but with truth. On that balcony, he hadn't just waited. He had prepared justice. The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It was a courtroom. The footage had played. The lie had shattered. And now, the silence was louder than the music. Madison stood frozen, her red gown suddenly feeling like a spotlight. Her eyes darted from Blake to the guests, to Camille, to Elijah, searching for a way out. Blake stepped forward, his face unreadable. "Is it true?" he asked, voice low. Madison opened her mouth, but no words came out. Camille moved beside Elijah, her hand in his. She didn't speak either. She didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for them. Guests began to murmur. Some left quietly. Others stayed, watching the drama unfold like a live broadcast. Blake turned to the event coordinator. "Shut it down. Now." The music stopped. The lights dimmed. The gala was over. Madison reached for Blake's arm. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't mean." He pulled away. "You humiliated him," Blake said. "You lied. You slapped an innocent man in front of everyone." Madison's voice cracked. "He rejected me. I was angry. I didn't think." "You didn't think?" Blake's voice rose. "You tried to destroy a man's life because he wouldn't sleep with you?" The room was still. Madison looked around, desperate. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." But it had. And now, the consequences were hers to carry. Elijah didn't gloat. Camille didn't cry. They simply stood together, stronger than ever. And as Madison was escorted out of the ballroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor, the guests watched in silence. Because tonight, the truth had won, and the lie had been sent packing. The ballroom was emptying. The music had stopped. The guests were leaving in clusters, some whispering, some stunned into silence. Madison was gone. Blake had disappeared into the study, and the Whitmore mansion, once a stage for spectacle, now felt like a cathedral of truth. Elijah stepped onto the balcony, the city lights flickering behind him like stars. Camille followed, her heels clicking softly against the marble. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Camille reached for his hand. He took it, gently, like it was the only thing anchoring him to the moment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Elijah shook his head. "You have nothing to be sorry for." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "She tried to ruin you." "She tried," he said quietly. "But she didn't." Camille leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. The wind brushed past them, cool and clean. Below, the city moved on, unaware of the storm that had just passed above. Inside, the screen still glowed faintly. The footage had stopped, but the truth lingered. Elijah turned to Camille. "You believed me, even when it got ugly." "I know who you are," she said. "And I know who she is." He smiled, not with triumph, but with peace. "She thought she could break me," he said. "But she didn't know what I had." Camille looked up. "What?" He kissed her forehead. "You." And as they stood there, wrapped in silence and city light, the mansion behind them felt smaller. The lie had been loud, but their love, their truth, was louder. Madison sat alone in the Whitmore study, the door closed behind her. The red gown that once turned heads now felt like a costume, a reminder of the lie she wore too well. Blake stood across the room, arms folded, eyes cold. "You humiliated me," he said. "You humiliated this house." Madison's voice cracked. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "You accused a man of assault," Blake snapped. "You slapped him in front of our guests. You lied." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "He rejected me. I felt invisible." Blake's jaw tightened. "So you tried to destroy him?" She looked down. "I didn't think anyone would believe him." Blake stepped closer. "You underestimated him. And you underestimated Camille." Outside the study, Camille and Elijah stood quietly. They weren't celebrating. They weren't gloating. They were simply present, dignified, united, and stronger than ever. Blake opened the door. "You need to leave." Madison's eyes widened. "Blake, you need to leave," he repeated. "Tonight." She stood slowly, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She walked past Camille without a word, past Elijah without a glance, and out of the mansion that had once been hers. The staff watched in silence. The guests were gone. The truth had settled. Camille turned to Elijah. "You okay?" He nodded. "I am now." And as Madison's car disappeared into the night, the Whitmore estate felt different. Not quieter, just cleaner. The morning after the gala, the Whitmore mansion was quiet. The staff moved gently, the air felt lighter, and the tension that once clung to the walls had vanished. Camille stood in the garden, sunlight warming her face. Elijah joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. They didn't speak at first. They just stood, together, whole and unbroken. Inside, Blake Whitmore sat at his desk, reviewing security protocols. He had already issued a public statement, apologizing to Elijah and Camille, praising their integrity, and announcing Madison's departure from all family business affairs. The media had picked up the story, but not the scandal. The truth. Elijah Brooks exposes false accusation with grace and proof, one headline read. Camille Brooks, the quiet strength behind the storm, read another. Elijah didn't care about the headlines. He cared about Camille, about the truth, about the fact that he had walked through fire and come out clean. Camille turned to him. You didn't just protect yourself, she said. You protected us. He smiled. I didn't do it alone. They walked through the garden, hand in hand, past the roses Camille had planted herself. The mansion loomed behind them, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a chapter, one they had closed. And as they stepped into the sunlight, the world felt new. Not perfect, but honest. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a man can do is stand in silence, wait for the right moment, and let the truth speak louder than the lie. And what Elijah did on that balcony, it didn't just change everything. It reminded everyone watching that dignity always wins.